Some of you may have already seen this video. I'll explain at the end of the video why I had to re-upload it.
Came across this interview on YouTube where it's a Vietnam veteran being interviewed and asking about his experience. And for the first time ever, I couldn't relate. Now, as a veteran, what most veterans will understand and experience is that whenever you meet another veteran, doesn't matter what country, what war, there's a commonality that bonds us. There's very similar experiences that we all experience that bonds us. And so when I watched this video and I couldn't relate to anything that he was saying, I had to ask myself why.
The people hated me. The Vietnamese people hated me. And it was that was perfectly clear. I mean, people didn't say good morning to you. People didn't, I mean, people hated me.
I never felt hated. That might be weird to hear, but these people brought me into their houses. I would sit with them without my rifle, without my body armor, and talk to them for hours. They would let me eat their food and drink their drinks. It was very comfortable. I don't know how else to explain it, but I didn't feel like a stranger in their country. I didn't feel like they felt they were threatened. And I wasn't sure at first, George. And I wasn't sure at first why this wasn't connecting, why I couldn't relate to anything that he was saying. But then I got to this part.
And then you go through villages and, you know, you get sniped at, and so you call an airstrike in on the village and the whole village goes up. Or you go through a place and you search it and you burn houses and blow them up.
Because when I was in Afghanistan, that's what we all wanted to do. If someone shot at us, we wanted to nuke their entire village. But we were following a policy most people know as hearts and minds. Is that we were trying to win over the population.
Well, when I got to Vietnam, I literally expected to be welcomed with open arms by the people of Vietnam. Disappointed that there weren't people standing along the road waving to me and, you know, offering me flowers and things. I really expected to be greeted with open arms as a liberator, and it was as though I was invisible. And that was a little perplexing. Moreover, it was
like I was saying, this is exactly, I didn't feel like this guy, but I did feel welcomed with open arms. They would let me hang out with their kids. I worked at checkpoint the majority of my time in Afghanistan, and kids would skip school and come hang out with us. And they wouldn't get in trouble with their parents because I would see their parents at the checkpoint and talk to them, and they were completely okay with their child coming to hang out with me, a foreigner in body armor and a rifle. They trusted me. They didn't feel their son or their sons were in danger hanging out with a U.S. soldier in their country. I did feel welcome, and I think the reason why I felt welcome was because of hearts and minds. That's because when we did get shot at, we went through every possible measure to make sure the only people who died were the terrorists, were the bad guys shooting us, that we went the extra mile to make sure innocent civilians didn't get caught up in the crossfire. I used to think hearts and minds was dumb, that it was gay, that it was the reason why my friends were dying. And now seeing the death count at Vietnam versus Afghanistan, very similar wars, maybe the government's policy be hearts and minds was keeping us safe. Maybe that's why less soldiers died in Vietnam. Maybe that's why I felt welcome and this guy didn't. Was because of hearts and minds.
And 2 tractors came in. They had a whole bunch of Vietnamese up on top. High, flat-topped vehicles about 8 or 9 feet tall. And as the tracks wheeled into the park, the Marines up on top immediately began hurling these people off. They were bound hand and foot so that they had no way of breaking their falls. And they were old men, women, children, no young men. And I couldn't believe these guys were treating these people this way. And I turned to Jimmy and said, I grabbed him by the arm and said, what are those guys doing? We're supposed to be helping these people. And Jimmy turned to me and he looked at my hands on his arm. I sort of took them off and he said, Earhart, you better keep your mouth shut until you know what's going on around here.
Everything he just said right there seems wrong to me. That's not what I witnessed. That's not what I experienced in Afghanistan. As an interrogator, I was working directly with detainees on a day-to-day basis, and this is not how we treated them. If we did this, we would literally go to jail, and I think that's part of the reason why we were welcomed with open arms and treated better than the Vietnam vets were.
They looked funny, and they acted funny. I mean, just riding along in this Jeep the first day I got there. They lived in little straw huts, and they had animals in their backyards, and they weren't like us. They smelled bad. The whole country smelled bad. You could smell it. It hurt the nose. And that was disturbing.
That's one of the very few things that I can actually relate to this guy saying, yeah, that's very accurate to Afghanistan.
All of the things that went into it, but I began to understand, it became obvious that the enemy was the very people in these villages around us, and we were in a very heavily populated area at that time. They were the enemy, or at least the enemy was out there somewhere, and we couldn't tell one from another.
To a certain degree, I can relate to this because, yeah, they didn't wear a military uniform, so it was hard to tell the enemy from the civilians. But on my channel, I'll link it below, I have a video about Afghan Bob and how a local Afghan, he worked directly with me to bring me IED parts and weapons and whatnot. I'm sure you can relate to that. Everyone's experienced that. And the whole entire reason is because his daughter almost got blown up by an IED that the Taliban had in place. And so when he came to me, I helped him. We would send EOD out. We would defuse these bombs. We helped keep his daughter alive. And so the locals, specifically Afghan Bob, told me about an attack that was going to happen, and our patrol base was set up. So as soon as we started getting shot at, we were able to shoot back at them, and none of the American soldiers died. That's because a local told us where the enemy was going to be, when they were going to be. So we may not be able to distinguish the local civilians versus the Taliban, but we have local civilians telling us which ones were Taliban.
And you begin to think, these people are the enemy. They're all the enemy.
He's being loud. I guess he wants to start in the video now, but I didn't feel like they were all the enemies. Specifically, people like Afghan Bob would point the enemy out to me. And so I didn't have to worry too much because I had made friends with the locals, legit friendships with local Afghans, to the point where they wanted us Americans to stay alive and they wanted their countrymen to die. That's an interesting feeling.
Common perception, the notion I had when I was in high school was that the Viet Cong terrorized the Vietnamese population, forced them to fight against the Americans at pain of death.
A sad thing about the Afghan war is that's exactly what would happen, though. The locals didn't become radicalized for the most part because we were there. The Taliban would roll in and tell them, hey, you are now working for us. You are now going to go fight the Americans. So something really sad about the war is, to a degree, innocent civilians, in a way, did get caught up because the Taliban forced them to fight us.
What I began to understand in Vietnam was that they didn't need to do things like that. All they had to do was let a Marine patrol go through a village. And whatever was left of that village, they had all the recruits that they needed. I began to understand why the Vietnamese didn't greet me with open arms, why they in fact hated me.
One time the Taliban fired a bunch of rockets at our FOB, but they missed. They went over and they hit the village next to us. A lot of our bases were set up either in villages or next to villages. And so after they missed our base, we took a patrol out there and let them know, hey, we're here with EOD. We're going to defuse these rockets that accidentally fell into your village. Please gather your people and move them out right now. We're going to blow these up and we'll get out of your hair.
What I began to understand within days, and which became patently clear within months, was that what was going on here was not what I had been told. What was going on here was nuts, and I wanted to get out. I knew if I were still alive on March the 5th, 1968, they'd stick me on an airplane in Da Nang. We used to call it the Freedom Bird. And I could fly away and forget the whole thing.
I don't want to forget the whole thing. I have a lot of great memories. I helped keep innocent people alive. It was a very fulfilling experience.
Now, part of what was going on is that I could not have made sense of what I was seeing and doing in Vietnam because I did not have a full deck of cards. I needed to have an understanding of the political and historical realities that brought us to Vietnam before I could make sense.
I could not really make sense of what's going on there. It's literally why I lost my religion, because seeing dead bodies, seeing innocent civilians get killed for no reason by the Taliban, I agree with him to the point where it makes you lose hope in humanity and you don't understand what's going on.
And I could see that nothing we were doing was having any impact on the war itself. You know, the funny thing about Vietnam is that I was getting Time magazine every week. It came in the mail. I could read about my war even as I sat in the middle of it. And I would read about what Lyndon Johnson would say and what McNamara would say and what Rusk would say. And I could look around and see that, I don't know what war they're talking about, but that's not what's going on here.
But the difference is, what the media was reporting about Vietnam is that everything was going well, and it was not going well. They were being lied to in the opposite direction, whereas I got to experience with the media reports, they would lie to you about what we were actually doing there. They would tell you that we're killing innocent civilians and that we're oppressing innocent people, when quite the opposite was happening. People like Afghan Bob got to keep his daughter alive because we were there. We saved a lot of people. That's probably a hot take. A lot of you watch this are probably going to agree with what he said and disagree with my perspective. Oh, well.
Part of what affected my coming back, I was happy to be alive. I was excited, but at the same time, I was very ambivalent. I was afraid.
The weird thing about deploying to Afghanistan is, in a way, it kind of made me hate my fellow Americans to see how awful other countries are, how unsafe they are, how terrorist-ridden they are. And then to be born in a country like America where you get to grow up in relative safety. It's one of the safest countries. For the most part, you get a fair shot. The American dream is still alive. Losers that didn't try have failed. But it's frustrating to see how much worse it can be in the world. And yet, my fellow Americans want to complain and call the system that we live in, the system we grew up in, is somehow unfair. Being born in America is like winning the lottery. It is extremely lucky. And it's sad that such a small percentage of the world gets to experience what I experienced, gets to grow up in the country I grew up in, and gets to live a relatively safe life. But when you do not have that option in the majority of countries, like Afghanistan. It's not my normal type of video. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Listening to my experience on life. The normal room I film in is currently occupied. But once again, I'm at the end of the video not knowing what to say or how to wrap this up. But, so like, share, and comment. Communism is gay.
The owner of the video I got the clips from, he filed a claim against it saying that it wasn't covered under fair use. And even after I showed him that it literally is fair use, he still claimed it and took the video down. So now I have re-edited it to better fit into the terms of service. So that way, if he tries to claim it again, I can win against his claim. If you're watching this, you're a disgusting old boomer, and I hate you for being a disgusting liar. And too bad the coronavirus didn't get you.